You are a political activist, aren't you?
I don't recall any of that.
I
recall this Mr. Weber's
have
case.
amnesia about it. If you believe that, you believe Elvis is alive and running a small bait stand on Lake Erie.
Here's what she said. These allegations about you are serious. That's one of the reasons I am here, meaning in court, and Mr. Ritz will more than likely be taken off this case because of these particular allegations. So did that happen?
And I believe it was in case I needed to be a witness. But those allegations.
This is what your supervisor said in open court.
You stated, and I quote, "Most convicted sex offenders who live and work in West Tennessee are productive members of the community." You removed the Tennessee flag from the U.S. Attorney's office after you were sworn in.
You said, quote, "We're experiencing a long overdue reckoning with racism in the criminal justice system."
You are a political activist, aren't you?
I would not consider myself that at all, Senator.
Okay. When you were sworn in as U.S. Attorney, you gave a speech, didn't you?
I did.
Okay. Here's what you said. I'm going to quote from your speech. "But you should know that justice for me is about more than putting people in prison. For me, it's also about who votes and how hard it is to cast that vote. It's about where pipelines go. It's about where bus routes go. Justice is about whether people in all zip codes can get along, whether women have access to health care, whether citizens have affordable housing or clean drinking water. Sometimes those are Department of Justice issues. Sometimes they are not. But for me, they're all justice issues." Did I read that accurately?
I believe so, Senator.
Okay. Did you really remove the Tennessee state flag from your conference room?
Senator, I appreciate you asking about this again. As the chief federal law enforcement.
Welcome. Did you do it?
So I felt it was fundamentally inappropriate when I gave press conferences and similar statements to the public to indicate or suggest somehow that I spoke for the state, which I don't under our system of federalism.
Are you embarrassed to be from Tennessee?
Not at all, Senator. I am from Tennessee, grew up as a public school kid in Tennessee.
But you were embarrassed to have the Tennessee flag.
That's not it at all, Senator.
Okay. You have a history of lying to your professional colleagues, don't you?
That's not true, Senator.
Okay. Do you know a former public defender named Stephen Shankman?
I knew him to a degree. I'm not sure we ever had any cases together. I knew who he was, yes.
Well, in a private email, not meant for public consumption, to another one of your professional colleagues, this is what Mr. Shankman said, talking about your lying. He said, "It is unfortunate that this is not the first, second, third, or whatever occasion that this sort of thing has occurred. But everyone should be aware of this unfortunate pattern of behavior. You should be aware," he said to the other lawyer, before the other lawyer dealt with you. "Your client should be aware, and you should proceed with extreme caution." Was Mr. Shankman lying?
To the degree he suggested that I acted unethically, that was not accurate, and it wasn't in any occasion, much less on numerous occasions.
Okay, let's talk about this case, United States v. Von Rico Weber, which you claim to not remember. But before I do that, a few seconds ago, you lied to Senator Hawley, didn't you?
I'm under oath, Senator. I did not lie.
You said you have no knowledge of any complaint, professional complaint made against you, didn't you?
I said I have no knowledge of any sort of formal complaint, and he read from a letter that I don't believe I ever saw.
And you were shocked. You
If
never heard of that before.
If there were a formal complaint, that, as I said, I had not known about that.
Okay. You were amazed.
I don't recall any of that.
Any-
I recall this Mr. Weber's
You have
case.
amnesia about
Again, I am unaware of any formal complaint or investigation, certainly was not,
You believe in the Tooth Fairy?
Senator, I don't,
You believe in the Easter Bunny? Now, in this case, United States v. Von Rico Weber, you lied to the defense counsel. And the defense counsel then had to go before the court and withdraw a plea for his counsel. And a complaint was filed, about which you apparently have amnesia. And the Justice Department replaced you. And the lawyer from the Justice Department who replaced you, this is what the lawyer said. The new attorney said about you. Said these allegations against Mr. Ritz are, quote, serious. And it is taken so seriously, referring to the Department of Justice, by our office. That is one of the reasons I'm here, and Mr. Ritz will be more than likely be taken off this case because of those allegations. End quote. You lied to Senator Hawley, didn't you?
I didn't lie to the defense counsel in that case. I didn't lie today, Senator.
Now, my good friend Senator Ossoff asked you if you'd follow the law. And you said, yeah. But if you're lying to us today, we're stuck with you, aren't we?
Senator, I have not lied and did not lie in that case.
You just have amnesia.
I did not lie in that case. There was a written plea agreement with the entire agreement of the parties.
If you believe that, you believe Elvis is alive and running a small bait stand on Lake Erie. Shame on you.
Senator Haggerty and I gave you the benefit of the doubt for the U.S. Attorney, but we have heard from so many people in West Tennessee of their frustration with you. So when you look at this, how can criminal defendants that come before you as a judge think you're going to give them a fair shake? How can attorneys that expect their clients to be treated fairly in the courtroom expect that you're going to behave ethically and not discredit them, not discredit the attorneys?
Senator, in my career, 19 years, the only job I've had as a lawyer is to represent the interests of the United States and keep people safe in our state.
How about the people of Tennessee?
And we represent the
Because
people.
that should be a priority too. You referenced the previous allegation against you. The court never addressed that because the attorney withdrew from the case. Okay, let me ask you this. You hired a number 2, Reagan Taylor Fondren, who received a year of probation for prosecutorial misconduct, including unconstitutionally burying evidence and misleading the court. Why did you hire her, and what was the follow-on with that?
Senator, our first assistant United States attorney, I did not hire Ms. Fondren. She has been a dedicated public servant her whole career. I promoted her to be first assistant. As with all of my AUSAs, I am proud of the work that they do to uphold the rule of law and protect people.
Let's talk about the people of West Tennessee, because your primary duty as a U.S. attorney is to keep the people of West Tennessee safe. Memphis is more dangerous under your leadership, and it's a direct result of your lax policies of not prosecuting violent crime. We know about the Lobley case, and we know that he had been charged with 4 felonies, including unlawful possession. So the Shelby County DA has publicly stated that the Lobley case was accepted for federal prosecution. Is that accurate?
Senator,
Yes or no?
9 days before the tragic killing of Officer
Yes or no?
McKinney, our office did accept that for potential federal prosecution. We were
Okay.
diligently investigating that
Let's
case.
talk about this. The prior U.S. attorney brought 100% of prosecutable gun cases. If you weren't in charge, Mr. Lobley would have been behind bars.
I want to say, Senator, if I may, I have no control over the state system. Mr. Lobley had been arrested in the state system and released on bond in the
Federal
state.
charges.
He
For
was arrested.
Federal charges. You and the DA have a difference of opinion on this.
No.
Because he says he was accepted for federal prosecution.
And referenced
So-
for our consideration, but we had not yet charged Mr. Lobley, Senator.
Okay, so you were not moving at the pace of your predecessor. Let me move on to sex offenders. Because in May of last year, you stated, and I quote, "Most convicted sex offenders who live and work in West Tennessee are productive members of the community." What would you say to the families whose children's lives have been ruined by sexual exploitation and abuse? And how do you think that they feel knowing that the chief law enforcement officer, their chief federal law enforcement officer, believes that these sex abusers are productive members of the community?
Senator, I don't believe I said that.
I'll
there may
provide
be,
you with the quote.
I'd be happy to respond in writing,
Yes.
but I can tell you, Senator, we have an
You
active.
made that quote. Let me move on because if you'll respond in writing, I wanted to raise the issue we talked about previously, which is you removed the Tennessee flag from the U.S. Attorney's office after you were sworn in. And we have heard from several people that you did this. So I want to know, you told me it was because you thought the office was cluttered that you removed the flag. But you were there for the people of West Tennessee. You removed the Tennessee flag. So what did you do with it? Did you throw it in the trash? Did you put it in the closet? Why did you not see your appointment as having a duty to the people of West Tennessee?
As Chief Federal Law Enforcement Officer, Senator, I represent the United States and the Department of Justice. And we're talking about the conference room where we give press conferences and similar public statements. And I felt it was fundamentally.
Mr. Ritz, that doesn't fly. Mr. Chairman, I've got the sex abuse quote. I'll submit it for the record.
In your 2023 U.S. Attorney Investiture speech, you highlighted the challenges you believe America faces and what justice means. You said, quote, "We're experiencing a long overdue reckoning with racism in the criminal justice system." Mr. Ritz, what part of the criminal justice system needs a long overdue reckoning?
Senator, what I was describing were a number of things that have happened in recent years in this country that framed, I would say, in some ways, the work that we do in the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Is the American justice system systematically racist?
That is not a sentiment that I hold. To the degree there is a definition of what being systematically racist means, I understand some individuals have pointed to disparities in sentencing and that type of thing, but that's not a view that I have.
So that's not a view that you have. That was your testimony. Well, you also said, quote, "There cannot be one rule of law for people who look like me and another for people of color." That sure sounds like the view you just said you didn't have. Do you believe that's our system, that our justice system has one rule of law for people that look like you and a different rule of law for people of color?
No, what I said is that absolutely we cannot have one rule of law for people who look like me and another for people of color. We cannot have one rule of law for the powerless and another for the. There's just one rule of law. That's what I said.
You also said, when asked if the criminal justice system is systematically racist, you said, quote, "There are structural barriers and disparate outcomes that communities of color experience in our society, separate and apart from any individual's views or intentions." Now, that again seems to be saying the same thing that you're saying you weren't saying. I'm just trying to understand what your views are.
And Senator, that was my attempt in that written question to grapple with, again, what was being asked by systematic racism. I understand some have pointed to structural barriers and disparate outcomes.
So what are the barriers and outcomes you're referring to?
I can think of one prominent example that I've had some experience with, which is the disparity in cocaine sentencing between crack sentencing and powder sentencing. This body has addressed those disparities on multiple occasions, and that has been, as I understand it, something that people have addressed as a result of disparities.
Okay, you also said in responses to questions for the record that as the Attorney General has explained, everyone has implicit biases. So what are your implicit biases?
Senator, I understand implicit bias to refer to unconscious bias that exists below the level of consciousness, and so to the degree I have implicit biases, I think we all do. I think that's partly the point. Is
So
I don't know,
everyone's a racist, whether they know it or not?
and that's, I would say that everyone might have implicit biases, and I don't know what.
So what's the difference between bias and prejudice?
I think there can be a lot of overlap in those things. It depends, I think, on the context.
So you're saying everyone is prejudiced.
That's not what I said,
You
Senator.
just said everyone has implicit biases, and you said that bias and prejudice, I think your words were, there's a lot of overlap.
I think that's right, and I understand implicit bias, and I'm not an expert on the subject, to refer to a set of biases that may exist beyond, under a conscious level.
So since you talk about these implicit bias issues, have you taken a so-called implicit bias test?
We received training that was put on during the last administration in our office on implicit bias. I attended that training in our office.
And what did you take a test?
I don't believe there was a test associated with that, Senator.
Okay, you also said, quote, "But you should know that for justice, for me, is about more than putting people in prison. For me, it's also about who votes and how hard it is to cast that vote. It's about where pipelines or bus routes go. Justice is about whether people in all zip codes can get a loan, whether women have access to health care." That's an interesting statement, and in reading it, what's striking is that that's de-emphasizing the core role of a U.S. attorney. The last I checked, a U.S. attorney is not in the policy business of deciding where pipelines go. That's the role of environmental activists and left-wing activists, but is not supposed to be a U.S. attorney. Why was your focus elsewhere?
Senator, and the very next thing I said was that those are not issues that we deal with on a day-to-day basis in the U.S. Attorney's Office, where we are primarily focused on enforcing criminal laws. I was seeking to place justice as a broad concept at the center of, to place our work within justice as a broad concept.
So do you agree that Memphis is one of the most dangerous cities in the nation?
It is. We have an intolerable amount of violent crime, and that's why there's no higher priority for us in our office.
Well, there's no higher priority except for pipelines, except for bus routes, except for bank loans, except for implicit bias, except for the fact that everyone is prejudiced. All of those other things are what you're focused on talking about instead of actually locking up bad guys who are murdering and raping and hurting people.
In those same comments, Senator, I said that we don't apologize for seeking significant prison sentences, and that's at the core of what we do. When we have serious violent crime, we seek serious sentences and consequences.
You are a political activist, aren't you?
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. I am a judge on the Washington State Court of Appeals. I don't consider that to be a political activist.
Okay. In 2020, you and 10 of your friends issued a written statement. You entitled it, quote, "Statement on Racism, White Supremacy, and Justice." Here's what you said. I'm quoting from you now. "Racism and white supremacy currently plague every social, educational, economic, governmental, and legal system. Racism and white supremacy currently plague every social, educational, economic, governmental, and legal system in our state and in our nation. And they have for centuries. Both, you're referring to your state and America, both target Black, Indigenous, African American, Latinx, and other people and communities of color, resulting in entrenched inequality and inequity, manifesting in unjust, unfair, and differential treatment, and yielding remarkably disparate and negative outcomes relative to those experienced by white people. End quote. Did I read that accurately?
Senator, I don't have it in front of me. I don't have any reason to think that you did not read that correctly.
Okay. You are very active in Planned Parenthood, are you not?
No, Senator.
Okay. Well, Planned Parenthood, in its annual reports, lists you as a, quote, silver friend, close quote. Do you know what a silver friend means?
I don't, Senator.
That's someone who has donated between $1,000 and $2,500 to Planned Parenthood of Greater Washington and North Idaho. That's in the Planned Parenthood annual reports. You don't know anything about that?
I don't recall. What I recall, Senator, is that my husband had donated to Planned Parenthood, and I think at some point in time they listed me along with him, but I believe that was a donation.
This is you.
Okay.
And in fact, they say that as of 2018, you've been a donor for at least 10 consecutive years. Is that right?
I do not recall donating them for the last 10 consecutive,
You don't-
10 years before 2018 or 10,
That's as of.
I don't recall, Senator.
Okay, you don't remember. Okay, let me ask you, you're on the Court of Appeal, a few of your cases. Do you remember a case called State v. Westwood?
I believe so, Senator.
And you were reversed in that case, weren't you?
Senator, in reviewing my cases, I think I've been reversed in about 2% of the cases that I've issued. I've issued almost.
Were you reversed in that case, though?
That was a very complicated case regarding sentencing
But I'm
law.
going to run out of time, and I got a bunch of these.
Okay.
Were you reversed?
That
in
might have been
case?
one of the 2% of the cases.
Were you
I think so.
reversed?
I believe that was one of the 2% of cases,
You remember
Senator.
a case called Personal Restraint of Heiress?
That, I think, was the case regarding whether or not the person had
Were
been
you
deprived.
reversed in that case?
That was, I think I was not
Were you
reversed.
reversed in that case, counsel?
Senator, I think that I wasn't reversed as to outcome, but it was one of the 2% of the cases where the state Supreme Court
Do you
disagreed with the
remember a
analysis.
case called Parental Rights of ALK? Were you reversed in that case?
Senator, I think that was one of the 2% of my over 450 cases where there was a reversal.
Do you remember a case called State v. Log Bomb?
I recall that case, Senator. That
Were
case,
you reversed in that case?
that was one of the 2% of cases. I issued an opinion to affirm a conviction, and the state Supreme Court overruled that
You
and
remember
reversed.
a case called State v. Barboza v. Cortez? Were you reversed in that case?
Senator, that case is not coming to mind. Again, I've issued myself personally written over 450
You remember
decisions.
a case called State v. Telvik?
Senator, I think I recall that name. That might have been one of the 2% of
reversed
cases.
in that too?
That might have been one of the 2% of cases,
Okay.
Senator.
Another case, Hendrickson v. Moses Lake School. Were you reversed in that case?
Senator, I recall that case. I think that might have been one of the 2% of cases where the state Supreme Court disagreed with the analysis of another appellate
Were you
court from the
reversed? You
state.
remember a case called State v. Curry? Were you reversed there?
Senator, I think you're reading off all the cases. I think that's one of the 2% of cases.
Okay. How about a case called Estate v. Rathbone? Were you reversed?
That's probably one of the 2%, Senator.
How about a case called Douglas v. Shamrock Paving Company?
Senator, that's
Reversed.
a case where I was largely affirmed. The only thing that was a reversed, I included everything, even if it was just a partial reverse. The only thing that I was reversed on was an award of attorney fees. The substance of the law, which was rather new in that case regarding what constituted an investigation for an environmental
So
cleanup.
you weren't reversed?
That part of it I was affirmed.
Yeah, I think that would be a surprise to the Supreme Court that you weren't reversed.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
I'm out of time. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.